funny.
I'm in my bedroom.
That makes me feel better.
Good.
That's pretty funny. I yeah, I had family in town this week, so got all the laundry done, which is nice. But
Oh
usually I would
yeah.
have a mountain of it.
Yeah.
Who can stay up on top of that?
Oh, it's too much.
I saw this
No, oh my
meme
God.
with Sisyphus going up the hill, and the boulder was labeled the laundry and the dishes.
Oh, I love it.
Yeah, perennial problems.
Yes.
Happy Monday, everybody. It's October 20th. Welcome to the Solid Ground live stream. I'm Leslie Elliott Boyce, and today I'm speaking with Jennifer Friend and Christine Siefenwalk. Some of our other usual suspects are not with us today, but we're delighted to be here having this conversation. And great to see you guys in the chat, or on the live stream anyway. Join us and let us know what you're thinking about. Solid Ground is a peer support community for people who have been impacted by authoritarian ideologies like social justice, woke, like CRT, like medical mandates. And we meet several times a week to have discussions that are not recorded, that are just discussions among friends, trying to share ideas about what we're experiencing and what we think we should do about it. So please feel free to join us. We have a Substack that you can subscribe to our um, peer support community, and we'll send you links for all of our meetings every week. So I'll put the link in the description as always, and we'd love to see you there if you're interested. And so this weekend, there were a bunch of rallies. Again, those No Kings rallies, like we saw, what, a few months back, maybe. I don't remember if that was right around the election or something. And Christine, you were saying you had some pretty strong reactions to that yourself. So I'm curious to hear some of your thoughts.
Oh, I get to go first.
Yeah.
Okay. No, I was just commenting a little bit before we started the broadcast. I have some reactions to it because, people have the right to protest. Of course, it's part of our free speech, rights, and I support that on in protesting in any regard. I mean, I support that. I support our right to do that. I think it's kind of silly, the context of the idea of no kings. I mean, I wish people would come up with something that's a little bit more relevant. I feel like the idea of a king kind of being in charge isn't exactly what our current political model is. So that just kind of throws me. I think I have some kind of issue around the language that's used. When I picture the idea of being run by kings and kind of a monarch structure, we wouldn't really have the right to protest if that were actually the case. So I think that's I think that's part of what kind of takes me aback. But at the same time, many family members and other people that I love, who I would otherwise feel very close to in many other respects, are actually very big proponents of this and of these kinds of protests, and are very much about the No Kings kind of mantras that are being pushed out. So, in some ways, I guess what was really, activating something, within me is just this feeling that I love them to death, but this is one area that's so huge that there's such a big kind of divide between us that we can't seem to bridge. Um, and in many ways, I don't always share what I think. In fact, very rarely do I share what I really think about these kinds of protests, or the idea of the No Kings kind of, context. Um, because I would rather avoid having some kind of really intense political disagreement or discourse around it with people that I love, just because I want to avoid that kind of conflict. I mean, I'm a human. I'm willing to come on here and talk about that, those sort of issues. But when it comes to people I'm very close to, I just find it more difficult. And primarily because a lot of the policy that's been passed over the last, 6 to 8 months has actually affected quite a bit of my family directly, in the sense that they work for various levels of government and different types of scenarios that the policies that have been, drawn up and acted upon have actually directly affected their home lives. So there is a piece of me too that struggles with that feeling of, okay, well, I feel for them and what they're going through as a result of that. So I've just had a lot of internal battles with that myself, because I'm willing to come on here and talk about how I don't necessarily, you know, align with that kind of ideology either. um, so it's just been a bit of a battle for me. So that's what I was talking about before the broadcast came on, was just the idea of the No Kings. I don't know if maybe we came up with something else, or there was some other way of protesting where there were different words used that might feel different for me. But regardless, there are many things that have happened politically that I do support, or that I do actually think I have some support for, not always in execution and maybe not everything, but there are components that I do think are better than where we were before, a few years, a few months ago, a year ago, 2 years ago. So I guess that's where I stand.
Jennifer, what do you think? What are your thoughts?
I mean, I agree that it's a good thing in this country for people to have peaceful protests, not riots, but peaceful protests. And people seem to be, as far as I know, behaving well at the protests. And so that's to me a positive. But I think, what's just really bothering me is still how divisive everything feels, that there's all these friendships and family relationships breaking up over it, and that the emotional climate is so intense that you can't, it's not even just that you can't disagree. If you're not extremely upset about the Trump administration, and you don't think that the sky is falling in, and you're not joining in these sort of, I think, panicked, a lot of discussions feel panicked to me, then people are furious with you. And I keep seeing things on, some of them are people I know, like on Instagram, that if you, um, you know, at all support Trump, or if you don't recognize that Trump is whatever, fascist, blah, blah, then unfriend me, unfollow me. And I find it really, really uncomfortable.
That's interesting. That's something that I was hearing in what you were saying, Christine, and I can relate to it, is this, you're willing to sit here and have a conversation about these things. We've talked a lot about politics, and yet with family, knowing that there's a sort of a difference of opinion that's strongly held among many of your family members, you want to avoid the topic generally. I feel the same way. Like, we've had family in town, and I know that they, every now and then there's a comment or there's something, but I also just know them. And so I have a sense of where they are with a lot of these things. And, my brother is a super lefty, and some of my older relatives. And I don't want to have those arguments with them, partly because I think we have more important things to talk about among us. So, our relationships are varied and more complex than politics. And so why would we distill everything down to that and then have a fight about it? But on, on social media, and here we're on YouTube, so it's kind of social media, we can have those conceptual discussions and be more frank about them in ways that we would avoid doing if we were face to face with somebody who we care about, who disagrees with us. And I think that's such an interesting phenomenon. And I think that there's this seeming unwillingness to engage in conflict that's increasing. And I guess I have many questions about it. Like, first of all, what's the point of the conflict? But then if the issues are big enough that they're worth voicing at some point, are they worth discussing? And when you see, I think the ultimate like tail end of that spectrum is what you're talking about, Jennifer, when you have the, if you voted for this guy, unfriend me. I want you out of my life. I'm going to excommunicate you from friendship status if you think different than me. I think some of us are kind of afraid of that and walking that line with family members who feel really, really strongly and have equated this to good and bad, good versus evil. Like the right is just bad. I think I've said this before, but a long time ago, I was at a dinner party and I was a staunch Democrat, had been for many, many years. And I made this joke at the dinner party that Republicans think that Democrats have bad ideas, but Democrats think Republicans are bad people.
Mm-hmm.
And then I followed it with because they are.
Mm-hmm.
I really believed that. I thought anybody who has these ideas is a bad person. And I see that now that I've stepped outside of that frame altogether. I'm neither Republican nor Democrat. I tend to vote Republican, but I'm not lining with any party right now. Now I see how that framing is impacting people and how people are taking it up. And I see that I was part of that. But another thing's really interesting. I was going to read a couple of chats here. Hi, Area Hermit Woman and Later Homes. Hello, Caravaggio and Cody R. and Marie Picard, 97 cents. Nice to see you guys today. Oh yeah, Later Home says it's weird to see all the 70-plus-year-old boomers coming apart at the seams. And I think it's interesting how many of the No Kings protesters are really in that age group, in that category. It's interesting. It makes you wonder what this represents for them. What does this represent? And I saw, and here I'm just throwing a whole bunch of things out there. Just love any of your responses on any of these things or something else. But yeah, Lolo Marigold says, I was like you, Leslie. Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. Yeah. I did some protesting during COVID. Actually had done some prior to that. After, if you guys remember, it was, I think, 2018, there was the measles outbreak at Disneyland or World or whatever, the one in California. And then a bunch of government, like local government, state government, started using that as an excuse to remove exemptions from certain vaccines. So in Washington State, they tightened down the exemptions on the MMR vaccine as a result of the big propaganda campaign that was that Disney outbreak. It was just all propaganda. And so you started to, at that point, really see the rollout of the heavy-handed push for a way of looking at vaccines as not something to protect you, but something that you take in order to protect everybody else. So the propaganda started to turn into this guilt trippy kind of use yourself as a vector to protect other people. You are the human shield, and it's your duty to inoculate yourself for the betterment of everybody else. And this was horrifying to me as a mother of vaccine-injured kid who had no use for childhood vaccines anymore for my children, had no intention of getting them vaccinated, and was now seeing that the government was going to push this on us with increasing harshness. So I did a little bit of protesting then. I showed up at the state capitol and supported the people who were there to testify. And then during COVID, when we started to have our lives taken away from us, we did a little bit of protesting then. I did that with my friends. And seeing the No Kings protests, it puts a bad taste in my mouth for all of that. It almost makes me ashamed that I was ever a part of that because it seems so flimsy and performative and kind of gross. It seems like a giant virtue signal, like the dancing nurses. I mean, it just feels kind of gross. So I look back like those times when I thought I was out there doing something important. Now I look at it through this lens and I feel like I kind of want to erase that. I don't know. It's and I can't tell if it's something different. Like this
What makes it feel performative now to you?
These people on the street corners doing their little thing. And I mean, they're just out there grinning at you and shaking their little signs at you and trying to get you to honk at them. And it feels very much like engagement bait. It's virtue signaling. It's like a test, a litmus test of who's with us and who's against us. We're kind of out there trying to gauge the popularity of our ideas and show up. And there's something, it has a very narcissistic feel to it. Like they're out there on display with their good ideas or with their virtue.
That's
Do you guys,
interesting.
do you see that the way I do?
Do you feel that way about all forms of protest or protest in all circumstances, or is it there's something about this particular wave of protest that feels performative to you?
It's this one in particular to me, but it just by how gross it seems to me, it sort of taints everything else. I don't, maybe I'm being too harsh, but I just get such a strong disgust reaction looking at and that's terrible, isn't it? I mean, I should be like,
Oh no, I
no,
think it's funny.
go.
I think
But
it's funny because the thing about the people in their 70s doing it and like what's their motivation? This thought, I'm not saying this is true, but the thought popped into my head and cracked me up. Reliving the 60s. Like
Yeah, I was
right.
thinking that
it's like
too,
a like
actually.
nostalgia.
Yeah. But it also there's not a lot of there's not a lot of like anchoring in this. I mean, it's just this broad no kings. What does that mean exactly? I want to know specifically what you mean, specifically what you're protesting against. Is it the ICE activity? Is it, what's going on with the government shutdown? Like specifically, what do you mean when you're saying no kings? I think there's something to it that to me is this broad, it just means no Trump. I mean, I feel like that's all they're saying. It's just no Trump, meaning nothing involving him or anything that he's touched whatsoever since he's been in office. Like that's kind of what there doesn't seem to be anything that's specific about this no kings movement. That's also too why maybe there's some flimsiness that I feel that it's too broad. Like, what exactly are you trying to protest against? If it's ICE, then say no ICE, and even that. In what regard? You want to just dismantle the entire institution of ICE because every country in the world, just about most countries, maybe not every single one, have an immigration policy. So, what do you mean by dismantling or not having ICE? What do you mean by having an open border? I don't understand how that's okay. So, that's me getting into what I think about the issues. But I guess the idea of no kings is specifically, it just doesn't say anything. It doesn't mean anything, in my opinion, because I
Yeah,
don't know what.
I think I take protests much more seriously if people are protesting a specific policy. Then it makes sense, and otherwise it seems more like sort of an emotional response. It's kind of like, do you guys remember the giant women's march with the pink pussy hats?
Yes,
I did not go to that, and
I didn't either.
I was
Me neither.
sort of baffled by it. I was like, what specifically are your demands or requests? What
Yes.
exactly are you protesting other than Trump made these, really vulgar comments?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But I couldn't see that the vulgar comments, while objectionable, I couldn't see that they necessitated this enormous protest and funny hats. So yeah, I think if people are going to protest, it should be we're against this policy and this policy and this policy, and here's why. Otherwise, it just seems like sort of almost more of a, yes, performative, but also sort of an identity thing. We're the people who are against this. We're just
Mm-hmm.
against the Trump administration, but without
Mm-hmm.
real specifics. And yeah, if you have problems with ICE, what specifically are you saying? Is it you don't like how ICE is handling things now? You don't want ICE at all? You want open borders? What is it? Like, what is it you're saying? Like, signs that say things like no human being is illegal that people put in their front yards, which to me is the ultimate form of virtue signaling because
Oh yeah.
you're just saying I'm a good person and I value people. I value people. But what are you saying operationally? It drives me crazy. Are you saying that everybody should be able to come? If so, is there a point at which you say, hey, this is a bit problematic that everybody's pouring across the border? Would you then draw some kind of line? Well, how would you decide that line? Which speaks to the hard nitty gritty of making those decisions and what your values are. But this just kind of, it's like a freebie. You just get to say, I'm a good person because I have this sign in my yard. I have a sign saying, no matter where you're from, we're glad you're our neighbor.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
So we're a good person. Are these signs saying hate has no home here? So are you suggesting that for your other neighbors, hate does have a home in their house? They welcome hate in their house? It's just
Mm-hmm.
so that all feels very performative to me and very much like an ego state of this is the
Mm-hmm.
way I want to see myself.
Mhm.
I
Mm-hmm.
don't look at a person and think that's an illegal. But then
Well,
what are they saying? What are their boundaries?
it's the
When do they
epitome
think
of
someone can
luxury
come and not
beliefs.
come?
Mm-hmm.
Huh?
It's the epitome of luxury beliefs because
Yeah.
they're the
Mm-hmm.
ones, they're not having to make the practical decisions because it's not practically touching them. And so
Mm-hmm.
they can sit there and spout these sort of conceptual level niceties and stay out of the fray.
Well, and a lot of them
That's what
live in
that feels like.
gated communities, So I
That's
was at
right.
I was at Bethany Beach, which is a lovely, quiet family beach over the weekend with my husband, and there was a quite a large, for such a small community, quite a large No Kings protest, and there were signs about ICE. And I was thinking, I wonder how many of these people live in these gated communities on the ocean front. So they've blocked access to the beach for everybody else. And nobody can even just walk through the neighborhood to look at the pretty houses because we don't want that. That's not
Yes.
okay. So
Yes.
it's kind of like boundaries for me, but not for thee.
Mm-hmm.
I just um I just want to know the practical nitty gritty of what they think, not this vague. And all the signs were vague. There's literally a sign saying no hate.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay. I'll
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
I'll try to stop hating. What I just yeah. There was something about keep hands off libraries. And I was asking my husband about it, and he was saying they pulled Stephen King out of high school libraries. So I don't know if they've started to drift into being too extreme because before we know that crazy stuff was in children's school
Yes.
libraries. And I don't know if the response has now gone in the opposite direction and is being too censoring and authoritarian. And we'll then do a good sign to inform people of that. What
Mm-hmm.
exactly is happening in libraries? Because yeah, I don't want that. But it's
Mm-hmm.
just all just feels emotional to me.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm. S. Covell 7 says, no kings, but put on your mask. No kings, but take the jab or lose your job.
Yes. Thank
Weebekans,
you.
Weebekans, thank you for the super chat, says, given the choice between a progressive society versus being seen promoting a progressive society, the leftist would always choose the latter. That's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think
Oh, that is interesting.
Mm-hmm.
part of my disgust with these protests is that I was very alarmed by everything that happened with COVID. As soon as COVID was a whisper on the lips of the newscasters, I saw the vaccine campaign rolling out. I saw what they were trying to do, and it really alarmed me about government overreach. And these people at these protests, they look like the exact people who were yelling at me and my kids when we were outside without a mask or when we'd go into a store without a mask. These these kind of this demographic, I'll say, looks just like the people we had the most to fear from when it came to our freedoms being impinged during the lockdowns. And so this feels very hypocritical to me. Another thing I thought of is that the no kings thing. I mean, generally a lot of people are saying this is like it's just basically no Trump. We just don't like
Mm-hmm.
Trump. And I'm not a huge Trump fan.
Mm-hmm.
He's who he is, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But what he is an executive.
Mm-hmm.
In contrast with what we've had in the last administration, we had a bureaucratic figurehead. I
That's
mean, we
right.
clearly had a bureaucracy. So maybe a part of what they're saying is just literally we want the bureaucratic
Yes.
state to lead. We had Biden who was in he was completely incompetent,
Yes.
clearly not any kind of executive. He was propped up and made to speak in a way that was so obviously stilted and force-fed. This guy was not making any decisions about anything. So he was as far from a king as possible. There was some committee that was pumping him full of lines, right? And then Kamala was not even elected via
Yes.
the nomination process. She was just assigned by committee, by the bureaucracy. And so maybe this is just at face value a group of people who is saying, we don't want an executive with a personality. We want the bureaucratic state to lead. We want
Yes.
to weaken the executive to the point where all decisions are being made by committee, which means that they're just going to slow roll over our rights and any kind of individual freedom.
Yes. And I say that because the very people that, I'm speaking about that are, are my loved ones were much happier when that was the case, when those decisions were made by bureaucratic bodies rather than having an executive branch that actually does act as an executive branch. And I think it's one thing to say that you like him or like the administration, and it's something else to say that you don't like him, but there is an executive branch in our country that we need to have filled, and somebody acting as an executive, whether or not you like him or like his decisions, is a different story. I'm not necessarily a huge fan either, but do we need that branch and a person to fill it that's actually acting in that fashion or taking on the role? We need somebody to take on that role. What we had before was too grandiose, and that did infringe upon our rights in many ways. Nobody was looking out for anybody else. Well, they were looking out for themselves. And I'm not saying that Trump doesn't look out for himself either, because I don't think he doesn't. I'm not a huge fan, but do I think this is an improvement from what we had before? I think we're at least the ship is turned around in the right direction. Maybe it's not moving yet in the right direction, but at least it's been turned around to some extent, I think. I mean, I think that's the best I can say at 9 months in, 10 months in.
Robert Crockett says, old white guy here, love the content. Thanks, Robert.
Aw, that's so sweet.
97 cents says, saying Kamala wasn't elected is really weak. She was elected as VP and successor to the presidency and nomination. So I'm curious about this because VP is not elected. VP is
No.
assigned by the presidential nominee. They select their VP. And then since you're voting for the ticket and you're usually voting for the president, you get the VP. So then it does not seem like it is the normal procedure to assign the VP to be the party nominee without any kind of caucus or any kind of decision.
Yeah, that's not, there was no, the DNC did not vote her in. She wasn't voted in against other candidates. She was assigned after Biden dropped out. So there was no democratic process that went into that. So the Democrats,
she would have been his successor if he'd been declared incompetent during office, but that is not supposed to be go into the next election.
No, she wasn't voted in. She was assigned.
So Tony Walls says she was elected VP, not presidential candidate. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Robert Crockett, thank you so much for the super chat. That's very nice. Yeah, good sister, bad sister. Conservatives will be disappointed by Trump yet again. I'm sure.
Well, yeah, Trump's not a conservative. I don't
No,
think.
he's not.
So
no. I don't know about, and I have a lot of family also who work for the government or who are in academia and have trouble getting grants right now. They can't get grants, so they can't do research. And so there's a lot of frustration.
Sure.
People around that.
Yeah. I mean, my family and friends have been affected by the shutdowns. And I'm not unsympathetic to that at all. It's extremely stressful. And, the way it's being done isn't careful. It's
right.
Just,
right.
cutting a wide swath and
right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm reading some of these chats as I'm thinking, but the family divide, that is a really difficult thing for a lot of people. The
It's
way that
difficult.
it's my information versus your information, and then we fight about it.
Well, that's the thing is then how do you correct people? So when somebody, says to me or gives me a piece of information like we've never had protests and marches this big in the history of the country, and there are literally millions and millions of people out taking to the street. I don't think that's actually accurate. I think that's something that the media has tried to portray to be bigger and a much bigger movement and shown that there are more people out there than actually are. So do you go and say, well, that's a piece of information you're getting from the propaganda, the big media heads, the legacy media, which is full of propaganda and only propaganda? Do you argue that point and say that that's actually not true? Look at my, piece of information here that says that there aren't that many people. There were a few thousand that were out at every rally, if that, and argue that point. My information is better than your information. It's more accurate than your information. That becomes a bigger than conversation and starts to become a bigger argument about the entire propaganda machine that is the legacy media that most people are probably still watching. Maybe not the people that look at solid ground or that look at independent media sources, but this type of group, like outside of our, groups here, the people that are just in the regular mainstream are still watching those kinds of programs. They're still getting their news that way. They're still watching MSNBC and they're still watching
Right.
even Fox. Okay, so then there's a whole nother, that turns into a whole nother bigger conversation / argument. Where are you getting your information from? Where do you get your news from? I mean,
So
I see
much
all
of
these
this
things.
depends on that. So much of it depends on what
Yes,
you're reading or what you're
yes,
watching.
yes,
And
yes.
that's really difficult because there's such a different slant and interpretation of things. And I don't really blame people for responding to what they read. I mean, I grew up in a super liberal household and it was the Washington Post and the New York Times. And I really grew up believing that if they said it, it was true. And and that anything the Democrats did, that they were sort of, the moral party, so
Yes,
it must be correct. And so I didn't really need to look into it that deeply. The weirdest thing changed my mind about that, and one of the things that did it was somebody published this horrible article in the Washington Post, which I was reading daily at the time, about Jordan Peterson, who at the time I'd never heard of. But they just said these horrible things. I was like, who is this guy? I've never read anything about him or heard of him. And so I started Googling him and I started watching his videos and I was like, this guy has some really interesting things to say. And this article, sure, you can criticize his ideas, but they completely misrepresented him and presented the misrepresentations as fact. It wasn't, these are his ideas and I think these are bad ideas because of A, B, and C. It was a complete misrepresentation of his ideas. And so there's all these people that probably have ideas about him that are completely untrue from reading that and thinking, well, I can trust the Post to tell me the truth. They tell me who's the good person and who's the bad person.
that's what I think they did with Charlie Kirk too. I mean, I saw a lot of Instagram, posts or whatever about people commenting, taking something, a line or two that he said out of context, and then talking about why he was a racist or whatever,
Yeah.
white supremacist, a fascist, this and that. And then you
Christian
go back,
nationalist, white supremacist,
yes,
fascist.
yes.
Yeah.
And you go back and put the quote in the bigger context of what he said and all of the rest of what he was saying in the bigger idea, and it was completely false. Same idea, I feel like, is what happened with him also.
And so, what's the motivation for doing that? Why not say, this person has this idea and I think differently because? Why lie about the idea? I mean, that's
So I
interesting.
don't
It's
think
like saying, I don't know how to defeat that idea, so I'm going to lie about the
that's
idea.
right. I think that's the reason right there. I can't defeat it, so I'm going to lie about it.
Well, one of the moments that really broke my brain was when Trump gave that Mount Rushmore speech. I don't know what year that would have been, probably 2020. And I had never listened to a Trump speech. I had listened to sound bites, and he always sounded like such a bombastic idiot.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Yeah.
because that's how they pull the sound bites, and because he's kind of a blunt orator anyway,
Yes.
so he's not going to sound like Obama, you know, so this really
Yes.
Right.
polished speaker. So and I didn't like him. My mom liked him, and I'd go, oh God, Mom, how can you like that guy? He's just a narcissist, or whatever I'd say. But I never sat and listened to a whole speech. So I listened to him give that speech at Mount Rushmore, and I remember going, huh, wow, that's really quite powerful. I really
Good
found that
speech.
very inspirational. It's a
Mm-hmm.
really good speech. And I had to like give him some grudging respect for
Mm-hmm.
what he was trying to express and how he did it. And I thought it was a very good speech. And then the next day, the news, all of these headlines and all of these clips were talking about how it was such a dark and dismal and like terrible speech. And it was the like somebody who was pointing the media at how, you know, directing them at how they were supposed to respond to this, decided, okay, guys, this is how we're going to spin it. And then they all spun it the same way. And what they said bore very little resemblance to what he
Mm-hmm.
said. It was an obvious twisting of his message in order to get what they were, that, you know, this negative picture that they wanted to portray. And although I had some sense that there was some media craft, that there was some
Mm-hmm.
propaganda here being employed, I was really stunned by the degree of it, by
Yes.
how blatant it was. And that was kind of when whatever TDS spell was on me kind of broke. And it didn't break to where I went, oh my God, I love this guy. He's my hero. It just went, oh, okay, he's good and he's bad. He's got some
Mm-hmm.
good qualities. He's
Mm-hmm.
got some bad qualities. He's not, you know, wearing devil horns and what Orange Man bad kind of thing. It broke that juxtaposition of, you know, this speech with this response.
Yep. I had that same experience with that speech. And they also focused, I forget one of the articles, it might have been in the Post. The headline was something about he gives a speech on whatever stolen land from such and such.
Yeah.
You know, they're
Yeah.
criticizing literally where he's standing to give the
Yeah.
speech, just to make it seem like he went in personally himself and took it, you know?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Just ridiculous.
Yeah. Yeah. It's pretty incredible. But somebody up in here, let me read. I think it was Jennifer Atkins had a comment that I wanted to go back to. The lack of discussion for some family is revealing, though. They repeat talking points but can't discuss. And that point about talking points is really interesting. I remember another moment that really gave me pause. Also during COVID, this was a time when a lot of propaganda was unraveling for me personally, because I'm watching, here's these stats. You can watch the actual death rate. You can watch some of the
Right.
actual stats, and then you watch the way the media is spinning it and how afraid that they want us to be about this. Um, I was I had milk and like raw milk and eggs and dairy delivered to this private residence through a local dairy. And so there was a pickup day. It's like every Tuesday we'd go and pick up, and everybody's doing the fearful social distancing. So it was, you know, if you got there at the same time as another family, often they'd wait at great distance from you before going up. So this one day I got there at the same time as a man who was picking up his order for his family. And we did that careful, you know, that little dance, the distancing dance. Like, I don't know if you're going to freak out and yell at me if I get close to you or whatever. But we ended up having a discussion, and it was interesting. He felt like I did about all of these things. And I'd been going down a bunch of conspiracy rabbit holes. And when I talked with him, he had the same, it's like the lines that came out of his mouth could have come out of my mouth. And I thought, that's weird too. Like, there's, I think that that was, I think I just had a strong reaction to that as well. Like maybe I need to step back and look at the information that I'm processing and receiving because I'm spouting lines now and I'm thinking that they mean something. Just like, if you want to go with sides, the other side is
Mm-hmm.
spouting lines and thinking that they mean something. And it's not that there's no truth in yours or theirs or whatever. It's just that when so many of your opinions are they're coming to you fully incarnate, fully, you're just receiving an opinion, then that's indoctrination. That's no longer
Yeah.
critical thinking.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's crystallizing an idea into absolute truth and then demonizing anybody who disagrees with it or doesn't
Mm-hmm.
enthusiastically adopt it. Because, I mean, if you remember with COVID, it was never allowed to be a disagreement about how to interpret science or what's the best approach to this situation. It quickly became a moral issue of you're a
Yes.
good person if you mask, you're a bad person if you don't mask, you're a selfish, horrible person who wants your grandmother to die if you don't vaccinate. You're a
Yes.
benevolent, selfless person if you do vaccinate. It really became um, a political thing. So, and it was sort of a way of identifying yourself so quickly.
Mhm. Yeah. Well, kind of thinking about the protesters then versus now. Yeah, I felt like if you had talked with people protesting COVID lockdowns, you would get responses that were really specific. Why are you here? People would have very specific responses as to what they were concerned about. And it's almost, I don't know if it's funny or if it's pathetic to listen to some of the man on the street interviews with the No Kings protesters. I don't know if you've seen any of those. Probably they
Oh
cherry pick
yeah.
them for people who sound stupid. So
Oh yeah.
I don't know. I have to give them the benefit of the doubt. But they don't know what the hell they're doing there.
They really don't. I mean, one woman was interviewed and was specifically asked why she's here. And she just said, well, I need to think about that for a second. There's so many reasons I have to think about it.
Hmm.
And the guy gave her like 30 seconds or so to come up with something. And she goes, it's just too big and too overwhelming. I can't put it into words why I'm here. That was her answer. And it was just,
Well,
I
see,
mean, it
then
was
that's
humiliating.
emotionally driven rather than it's sort of like I aesthetically dislike Trump because he's, crude and rough around the edges
Right.
and
Right.
um
Yes. Yes.
versus this policy that's being enacted is bad because of XYZ.
Yes.
Well, then that makes sense
Yes.
to protest.
Hmm. So putting my tinfoil hat back on and thinking about how we are manipulated by propaganda,
Yes.
are we are we dividing ourselves or are we being intentionally divided and to what degree?
Well, I think we're being intentionally divided. I guess that's me wearing my tinfoil hat. And I took such a wonderful, maybe it was this podcast. I don't know. I remember saying this to a group at some point on Zoom. I don't know when that was, but I remember taking this wonderful Black Studies class when I was in undergrad. And my professor was talking about a period in time where these poor Blacks and poor whites started to band together to kind of, become a bigger force, against the elites and to kind of rise up in their own power and be on the same team, in a sense. And that's, a point in which a lot of racism was really started to become injected into those communities so that it was like intentionally to kind of break them up. They were gaining almost too much power as a unified front. And so, they were starting to kind of rise above and to see what these elites were doing. And the answer was we need to create some squabbling amongst each other so that you're not paying attention to what we're really doing up here. You're too busy squabbling about, racism and all of these other issues, that you're not paying attention to what's really happening on a bigger, wider scale. That always stuck with me through all these years. And I mean, this was a class I took in undergrad, so it's been a long time. And so I always wonder if some of these things that happen are injected into our communities, into our world, so that we're not paying attention to kind of the bigger movements, like the digital IDs that are being rolled out, that are going to keep track of everybody globally and what we're doing and what we're buying and how we're spending our money. And that maybe those are the bigger issues of our sovereignty that are going to be eliminated at some point. Issues of our own personal freedoms that are being taken away from us while we're too busy screaming and shouting about CRT and about, race relations and about reproductive rights. And not that those aren't important issues, but that those have divided us so much, so that we're, our attention is placed elsewhere. So I wonder if that's the case, that if that is really the case, and that these bigger issues are what are going to be our downfall eventually. So I guess that's where my mind kind of lands when that comes up, when that question is asked.
Mhm.
What are we meant to be distracted from? What greater, issue and or evils are we meant to be turned away from paying attention to?
Yeah, I think that's spot on. That's absolutely, I mean, this has been used by governments and larger powers for millennia to try to
Yeah.
divide and conquer. So you get that's one of the things I remember learning that about the antebellum South as well. That actually a lot of the poor whites and the blacks who were slaves or recently freed really had similar interests. And if they'd banded together, they could have done a lot for their communities.
Mm-hmm.
And they were divided by the wealthy landowners intentionally. They were made to
Mm-hmm.
distrust each other intentionally
Yes.
because
You don't want
that was seen as a
workers, you
massive
don't want
threat.
workers agitating for rights, pay, and better working
Yes.
conditions.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's obvious that something like that is going on. I know I've come back to this example a couple of times, but I thought it was so insidious, especially given all of the fervor online right now about that you see with men versus women. You've seen one after another topic come up that has been pointed at dividing men and women, like the body count thing, the thing about hitting the wall, the thing about um being a mid, the thing, what's the current one? There's always something that comes up between men and women. And we saw a woman who went through her feed and showed how the algorithm presented the comments under a video of a conflict between two partners or husband and wife or whatever the video was about, and presented her with kind of man-hating comments that were "you go girl" or whatever towards the woman. And then her husband, looking at that same post, all of the comments that he saw were the opposite, were sort of woman-hating comments and like on go being on the man side. And so, but not supportive. It was just showing the ugly comments. And when you went through their feeds, she couldn't find the comments that he saw. And
Wow.
he couldn't find the comments that she saw. It was very selective. And I don't know if that's bots, if that's just that it's got some way of selecting for the more controversial or the more hateful comments. But it's very interesting. And so you see this divide and conquer thing happening a lot with men and women right now. And that's obviously got the outcome. I don't know if it's the intended outcome. I guess my tinfoil hat would say it is, but I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Of
Mm-hmm.
of reducing family strength and unity.
Yeah, absolutely.
It reduces the population quite neatly.
Yeah, that's true.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, 97 cents. That would be postbellum if it's after the Civil War. I was thinking of the antebellum period, so it would have been before the Civil War. Yeah.
Well, that's what makes AI so scary. I mean, I know that it's helpful in many ways, but isn't that part of what is also destructive about it?
What, the way that it can curate that?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So our experiences are so curated. And if you click on a few articles that have a particular slant, then the algorithm just starts to feed you everything
Yes.
through that lens. And your world actually becomes smaller, which the internet should really expand your world. And it often does, but it can become just condensed into this very narrow way of looking at things, I think, because of the algorithms.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, and I do think that it is interesting that we've, as people, found this kind of refuge in being able to speak our whole mind more clearly when we're doing it more impersonally.
Yes.
Like all of our thought, this is, I got off of Facebook in 2017, and I don't ever want to be back on Facebook. Because Twitter seems like that to me as well. It's kind of people shouting things that they wouldn't say in person. They
Yeah.
would use more delicacy if they were to say these things in person. They would use more diplomacy or say them a little bit differently. But instead, we kind of shout them. And I mean, who on earth would stand in a room with their friends and family and say, if you voted for so and so, you can just
Mm-hmm.
F off? And
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
so, yeah, Running Bear says my algorithm is auto adjusted since my housemate gets the NYT and watches only MSNBC.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm. And Marie Picard, yes, comments are geared at us individually. Interesting.
That is really interesting. That's kind of creepy.
Cody R, seeing all the militant COVID people I know personally at No Kings and Palestine protests and thinking that they have an educated grasp on those topics as well is impossible for me to take seriously. Tony Walls, I seem to remember a time in the late 80s or 90s when racism seemed to really be on the decline. Then the political left made it an issue again, and now we seem to be more divided than ever.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Thank you, Richard, for the super chat. Richard Jefferson says the bigger problem is survival and real community versus world power and control. Jennifer Atkins, curious, do y'all hear many clients these days talking about favorite stories they read? Books like Watership Down or Clan of the Cave Bear or Dragon Riders of Pern. Who reads books? Imagines. That's a good question. What do you guys think?
I don't know. And no, I don't. And I don't think people are reading the way they used to.
Mm-mm. No.
Yeah, I'm reading a book right now called Clara and the Sun. Who's that by? It's pretty good. I'm not that far into it, maybe halfway through into it. It is by, I might get this name pronunciation wrong, Kazuo Ishiguro, and it's pretty good. I recommend it so far if you want to read with me.
I
I've been
I've
reading
taken
Haruki Murakami lately too. I just read the Hardboiled Wonderland and the End of the World. I think I talked about that in a previous stream, but it's very good.
You
Just
did. I have
trying to
that on
read
my
more.
list of things to read.
Trying to read more. Any recommendations, Christine?
No, I'm guilty of not being a big reader these days myself.
Were you
It's
when you were
funny.
younger?
I never was a big reader even when I was young. I always had high grades in school and all that, but I wasn't a big reader. Um, I had a big imagination though. I used to create a lot of fantasy worlds and characters and things like that. So I was really into creating my own stories, and I wrote a lot, tons of little short stories and
Do you still do that? That's so cool.
yeah, not as much, but at one point I was really into that as well, but I didn't read as much. But it's interesting. I've taken a few kind of quite long plane rides recently, and you know, I remember a time when you used to see people pull out books a lot on planes, and now people are pulling out their tablets and their computers, and they're either watching movies or they're reading, whatever, you know, emails and things. You just don't see people reading books. I mean, and maybe people are reading on Kindles nowadays too. I don't know, but
Mhm.
you don't see people reading books like hardcover, or even paperback of the books where you actually have to turn pages. I mean, that whole process, you just don't see it as often.
Sour Kiwi recommends The Robber Bride by Margaret Atwood.
Oh yeah, I read that years ago.
Jennifer is a poet.
Oh,
Mm.
She writes poetry.
Oh, you do? Wow.
I
I love
do.
that. I love that.
Thank you.
You'll have to share some of that sometime.
Not on the air.
I'm sure it's
Share
wonderful.
privately. Yeah. Yeah.
Love to
That's
hear it.
good. Well, Jennifer Atkins says hi to the puppy.
Oh, thank
That's
you.
great. Yeah. Thank you for these recommendations. I know I've made this recommendation before. Oh, I was trying to, the name just skipped my mind. If I think of it, I'll put it on what is it called? It's got a weird name. Anyway, I'll think about it and put it in the notes if I remember it. A book I read about 2 years ago that I really enjoyed. And now I'm just teasing you all. You get no closure because I can't remember the name of it. Well, it's been lovely to talk with you guys. Do you have any final thoughts before we wrap up?
Just don't be a jerk to friends and family with whom you disagree.
I agree with that. It's just unnecessary. And there are too many other things. It's like what you said earlier today, Leslie, there's just too many other things to connect on that are more important than having these disagreements about politics. And sometimes it's better to just, rather than who's right or wrong and arguing it out, just, I don't know, for me, just letting somebody have their opinion and letting them just have it. It's fine. I mean, I'd rather preserve the relationship. It's not worth being right. And that's, I guess, that's the choice I've made. It's just not worth, proving myself to be the right one. I'd rather
That's
just be
really
in a
well said.
happier.
Yeah, you can be right or you can be in a relationship. Sometimes it comes down to that.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. Thank you for spending this time with me. And thank you everybody for
you.
joining us in the chat. It's great to
Yes.
see you all. And I hope you have a wonderful week. And we'll see you next
Yes.
Monday.
Sounds good.
All
Thanks.
right.